12 noon today, we'll begin to find out. Good morning, everybody. Today at noon, the NFL opens its window to negotiate with free agents, the legal tampering period, as it's been known in the past. The deals officially can't be signed until Wednesday at 4 p.m., but we'll start to hear today who is going where. Already over the weekend, the biggest trade of the offseason. I think it is. I don't think A.J. Brown would bring back as much as Max Crosby brought back. But how about that trade? The Ravens going all in with first-time head coach Jesse Minter, a 29-year-old offensive coordinator. They're not waiting around. They are going for 2 first-round picks for Max Crosby. Does anything say more about the NFL's still current desire and need for edge pass rushers than the last 2 big trades for edge pass rushers? The Micah Parsons deal last September and the Max Crosby deal from over the weekend. There is no doubt that there is still, other than quarterback, maximum priority given to elite level pass rushers, especially for and from teams who believe they are close, teams who believe they have to win now. We saw it with Green Bay last September. We've clearly seen Baltimore going all in. In some ways, believe it or not, it started with moving on from John Harbaugh in their mind. What will Washington do today? What will we start to hear beginning at 12 o'clock? My sense is that we're going to hear more offense than defense early on. That's just a sense I have. Look, there's one name that keeps popping up. I'm sure many of you living on social media all weekend long, and I would warn everybody, this is lying season. It's also misreporting season. You know, tied to Commanders, tied to Washington, tied to... There's just a lot of people out there trying to create content and trying to get people to get excited about what they have, thinking that nobody will remember what we got wrong. They'll only remember the 1 or 2 we got right. By the way, there's sound strategery in that thinking when it comes to social media. But the one thing that I think is going to happen more than anything else in free agency is I do now believe they're going to sign a running back. Which, you know, we've talked about this before. Like, when the season ended, hey, O-line, we're good. Running back, you know, okay, if they have to, if there's something there that's obvious, but we're good. Everywhere else have to get pass rushers, have to get run stoppers. Edge, interior, linebackers galore, corners galore, maybe a safety. Wide receiver, maybe 2. Tight end, for sure. But running back and O-line, not necessarily so. I think running back is going to be an early add. And I'd keep an eye on a guy like Rico Dowdle. And I've mentioned before, if it's not going to be Kenneth Walker, if it's not going to be Travis Etienne, and we know it's not going to be Breece Hall, for me, the next 2 from that next batch, Tyler Algier 1, Rico Dowdle 2. Like, I would be okay with Rico Dowdle. I'd also be somewhat okay if they tendered Chris Rodriguez and they brought back Jeremy McNichols and Bill Krosky-Merritt and Chris Rodriguez. You know, they figured it out between the 2 of them. But I don't think that's what they want to do. I think they feel like they need a lead back. Remember, Matthew Berry from NBC Sports had that last week, that Washington feels like it needs a lead back. They view Rodriguez as a good back, but not great as a pass receiver. They regard Bill Krosky-Merritt as a good back, but not a number 1 back, more of a 2 or a 3 is what Matthew Berry reported. And so I think that's going to be something they do and do quickly, and it wouldn't surprise me if it's a Dowdle, although I like Algier more, personally. Wide receiver, I think, is definitely in the cards in free agency or off of waivers, potentially. Brandon Ayuk. I did see a lot of the reporting with Washington tied to Alec Pierce. I saw some of the reporting with Washington tied to Romeo Dobbs. By the way, the more you read from what I would call like the A-list of NFL reporters, like I really like Jeremy Fowler as an example. I think Jeremy Fowler gets it right a lot of the time. He had Dobbs and with Washington. He also suggested that Washington is very interested in Pierce. So I've seen a lot of that. I think the bottom line is running back and wide receiver, and that's why I'm leaning offense early here, maybe starting at noon. Offense early will be the story. Could be wrong because we know they need defense more than anything else. Rashawn Gary became available or is about to become available. There's still, I think, a guy like Jonathan Grenard who is apparently drawing a lot of interest from around the league. According to a lot of what I would say tier one reporting, it's a day 2 pick. Washington's only day 2 pick is a third rounder. Now, it's earlier in the third round because of where they finished, but it's a third rounder, not a second rounder. Will Minnesota get a second rounder back for a Grenard? I've seen some of the Jalen Phillips out there. I like Jalen Phillips. I love him as a player, but he's really had an issue being available enough. I've seen the Hendrickson stuff. I'm not buying the Hendrickson stuff. Just me. It's a gut, not a no. I just think entering age 31 season, coming off an injury, there's a lot of risk in the kind of money that you're going to have to pay Trey Hendrickson. Like if somehow the money wasn't what Hendrickson and his agent think it's going to be, maybe. Yeah, so I think we're going to see more offense early. Tyler Linderbaum, that's a lot of money for a center, man. You want to pay that much for a center? By the way, then we're paying Tunsil. We've already paid Cosme. If you're going to invest big, invest in the quarterback position, invest in the trenches. Will Washington make the big move? I think a name to keep in mind, and this is not, anything that I know, but I still think a sleepy, sneaky area of need is interior D-line. And I think John Franklin Myers is a guy that everybody likes and knows can play. He's quick. He's got multiple moves. He, by the way, is very versatile along the defensive line as a pass rusher inside. Primarily, whether it's, real inside, which they may have a lot of real inside, or it's off the nose. But I think he can play almost from 0 out to 5 technique, 6'4", 290, 7.5 sacks, 25 pressures last year. I think I know why they're bringing Duran back, because they just don't have enough there. And they believe that the trade market is non-existent, and they'd rather get something back for him next year after letting him walk in free agency via a comp pick than not. If they had better players at that position, if they had more depth at that position, I think Duran would be gone. I think Reek Woolen's going to be interesting. I think the corner position is going to be interesting. But let's face it, man, they still, to date, based on the players they've even brought back at this point, they still have the fewest number of players under contract other than the Ravens in the league. Second fewest players under contract. There's no way they can't be busy starting today at 12 noon. Do I expect this to be a Dan Snyder, Vinny Serrato special from 2000 or 2001 or 2006 or 2007 or 2009? Not necessarily. I mean, I don't know that anybody really knows what's in their mind because they do keep it buttoned up. But the one guess I have is the early stuff actually may be on offense. All right, Max is with me today. Starting at 12 noon, we will be here and we will keep it, dialed in for all of the reporting starting at 12 noon. Ben's going to join us at 11 this morning, well in advance of the window opening up for legal tampering. Sam Monson was a guest of mine on Friday on my podcast. I really like Sam. Sam does a really good job. Was with PFF, now with the 33rd team. I'm going to play some of that back for you. You'll actually hear him predict on Friday, when I don't know that a lot of people had this, but he said, I think it's going to be, just bear with me, Baltimore that trades for Max Crosby. He had that on Friday afternoon. A lot of interesting thoughts from Sam on what Washington can do on the players that he likes versus those that he doesn't. I think the range could be anywhere from Hendrickson and Pierce to Dowdle and, Owe or Mafe. Like, in terms of the levels, of players. I think there's just a lot that we could end up seeing. If it's not Hendrickson, it could be Chason. It could be, if it's not Hendrickson or Phillips, I kind of feel like they're the two big names right now. It could be Chason. It could be Mafe. It could be Owe. It could be somebody like Joseph Asai from the Bengals, who I know Logan Paulson likes a lot. Yeah. And again, the other thing that we'll have to keep an eye on here starting at noon is their own free agents. Does Marcus Mariota sign with somebody else today? Does Debo sign with someone else today? It seems to me that Zach Ertz would be down the road. He's not a day one get. Bobby Wagner, more likely than not in these first few hours of free agency. But we'll have to keep an eye on our own. Chris Paul's a big one. There appears to be a legitimate market for Chris Paul. Not surprised. It's hard to find some of these guys. They've become more of a premium in recent years, interior offensive linemen. There's a center out there in addition to Linderbaum, a guy like Connor McGovern with Buffalo. We'll have to keep an eye on him. But Chris Paul, in terms of our own, does he end up signing early in free agency? Wouldn't be surprised. Wouldn't be surprised at all. We saw Tyler Biadasz get picked up pretty quickly last week after being released by Washington. Still, right, Max, no substantial detail on his deal. I was actually looking for that this morning. I haven't
heard anything crazy substantial or no real tangible information out there.
At this point, of all of their 32 restricted 29 unrestricted free agents, it's been Tressway, it's been Andrew Wiley, it's been Dietrich Wise, it's been Drake Jackson, it's been Shai Tuttle, who the team announced formally today, and they extended Nick Allegretti. I don't think I'm missing one. I think keep an eye on guys like McNichols and Martin, and maybe even a guy like Jonathan Jones. Jake Moody, they did tender. That's right. They did tender Jake Moody to bring him back. And then of our own, keep an eye on Chris Paul, Debo Samuel, Bobby Wagner. I think Ertz is a little bit further down the road. I don't think anybody's going to, snag him up early in free agency. That doesn't seem right. Oh, Trey Burks, obviously, they brought back as well. Yes. Marcus Mariota. Is there a market for him? Do we find that out early? A lot of these guys, the team has obviously said at this point, test the market. And we certainly want to talk to you if the market isn't what you believe it is. I'm sure that's, the dice they're rolling on a lot of guys. Oh, the guy, too, that I wrote down here that Ben's mentioned a couple of times. Ebba Keedy, the kid that grew up locally, played at Einstein, and has been in Atlanta. The 27-year-old edge pass rusher is a name to keep in mind. And Ben told us that a while ago. For me, the list for me starts with just the players that I'm most familiar with and I feel like would be the closest thing to sure bets in sure fits. And that's a hard thing to know for us, given that we've got a new offensive coordinator and a new defensive coordinator. Even more difficult, I think, defensively. And I think that fit the fits, especially in the secondary, are always a little bit tough for the average fan to identify anyway. But for me, like, I would love a Juwan Jennings, a Tyler Algier, a Chigakonkwo, um, as a group that they end up starting with here over the first several days. Defensively, I wouldn't mind a Nakobe Dean. I actually like Dean in many ways more than I like Lloyd. And I know that Lloyd had a great year. I think Nakobe Dean's defensive, overall instincts, he's been another guy. You got to keep him healthy. But when he's been healthy, I like him more than Lloyd and like a Walker, as an example. I still think from a wide receiver standpoint, even if you were to sign a Juwan Jennings, a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson would be so interesting to pair with Terry and Jennings and Okonkwo at tight end. I think the other backs that I like, I've mentioned some of them, but they don't fit as much as Dowdle and Algier fit. Like, I do like Gainwell. I think Gainwell's a great player. And I think Pittsburgh, if Aaron Rodgers comes back, they'd be nuts not to figure out a way to bring Gainwell back. He was so important to that team. Of course, I like Mike Evans. But Mike Evans is an older receiver. They seem to have an issue with older receivers and paying them. So it doesn't seem to be the right fit. Don't be surprised if they make a big move for a player that we're not even thinking of, like a kicker, as an example. I feel better about some of the guys offensively. Defensively, John Franklin Myers, and Owe. I wouldn't have a problem with Hendrickson, but I think it's risky. I think it would be majorly risky. I also, the corner that I spent a little bit of time on last week, I think I mentioned hold on, where's my list? Nashawn Wright. He had a breakout season last year with the Bears. 5 interceptions, Pro Bowl player after, struggling a little bit earlier in 24 with Minnesota, and before that in Dallas. They're going to need a corner. It wouldn't surprise me if they re-sign Jonathan Jones. These are some of the names of players I like. The one thing I'll say is offense and Dowdle. Look for that early more than defense and a big name. But of course, we'll see when it all starts at 12. Let's get to a what do you got real quickly. So basketball takes center stage as well this week with conference tournaments. But, man, I was thinking about this over the weekend because there were some big, buzzer beaters. Navy got knocked out on a three, about a 30-foot three at the buzzer. UNC Wilmington, the regular season champ of the CAA, got knocked out of their tournament. Navy, by the way, another, if quasi-local, if you want to consider them. Howard's now got to win the MEAC tournament, or this area, the DMV, for the third time in 44 years, or 47 years, excuse me, will have no local presence in the NCAA tournament. But I thought about what conference tournament used to be and what it used to mean, the ACC tournament, the Big East tournament. And sure, when we get to later in the week, there will be some big games. But have you guys seen basically the way these things start? Basically, the Big Ten tournament starts tomorrow night. And for all intents and purposes, like, it ends in 2 weeks. There's so many teams and so many games. It's insane, these Power Four conferences. The Big East is a power conference, obviously, in basketball. But, I mean, you just have, starting tomorrow, just a slew of games that start early and they don't end until late. But I kind of have this sense, as someone who used to love this time of year, that this is another thing that the NFL has just completely overwrought. This is completely masked by this week of NFL free agency. I mean, in some ways, they would have been better off, the NFL, just to prove a point of holding back free agency until the first week of the NCAA tournament next week. But conference tournaments, man, I mean, what do they really mean except at the major, at the mid-major, and the low major ranks. They mean very little. It proved last year that they didn't mean much to seeding, right? Michigan with their big run and ended up not, sort of benefiting from the seeding afterwards. There will be some matchups that'll be fun to watch, but they don't mean as much. And the matchups in leagues like the Big 12 and the Big 10. I mean, I was looking at the ACC, like potential, quarterfinal matchups or first, second round matchups. It's like, Stanford, SMU, or Miami, Syracuse. The Big 10, Maryland's playing Oregon tomorrow night in a first round game. First time the Terps haven't been much further down the line since they joined the Big 10. They're playing literally on opening night where they're just two games. It's Northwestern and Rutgers and Maryland and Oregon. Whew. Terps had a shot yesterday against Illinois. Definitely had a shot, but just aren't good enough. And their season will likely come to an end tomorrow night or the next afternoon. We shall see. Georgetown got a win, but they'd have to make a miraculous run. But, man, this used to be one of the best weeks of the year. I think it's turned into one of the most meaningless sports weeks of the year for that sport because of what starts today at noon. We'll still be there Sunday night, though, for the selection show. And the following week starts off, a 3-week run. That's a lot of fun, no doubt. The first 2 weekends in particular of March Madness, the first and second rounds on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, more so than the first 4 on Tuesday and Wednesday, and then the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8 games. By the time we get to the Final Four, a bit anticlimactic. It's kind of like the Super Bowl, a little bit anticlimactic. The fun, the drama typically comes before then. Should be a good tournament, though, when we finally get there. This week, completely meaningless. Oh, one other thing real quickly, because this may be the only chance we have to mention it. The Wizards lost again. They're doing a good job of losing games right now. Trae Young in his second game, 18 minutes, 17 points, 8 assists. He also had 4 turnovers, which is his thing. Shot it exceptionally well from deep. But 17 points, 18 minutes, 17 and 8 is pretty good. He's a good player. He's a creative player. I can't wait to see it next year. Let's just hope Anthony Davis is right. But good job by the Wizards to lose that game. And Julian Reese, off that 18 and 20, followed it up with 5 points, but 9 rebounds in 26 minutes. He's a bit of a rebounding machine. Sam Monson, you'll hear his thoughts on NFL free agency specific to Washington next. All right, joining me right now is Sam Monson. Sam used to be with PFF. We've had Sam on the show many times. He's currently with the 33rd team. Sam's been an excellent NFL analyst for a long period of time now at Sam Monson NFL on X. So, our team, Sam, this year with all the injuries fell to 5-12. The defense was horrendous. I would argue that over the last half of the season, it was the worst defense in the NFL. I'm not sure in my lifetime, Sam, of following this team and being a fan of this team, I've ever seen a worse defense than this particular team's defense. I saw the other day you did a segment, 5 minutes, on how to fix Washington. So have at it. How do we fix our team here with free agency starting next week?
Yeah, the defense was extremely rough last season, and that it looked pretty bad on paper heading into the year, and that was the kind of concern we had going into the season. Obviously, everything had been so good the year before. You found Jaden Daniels, team overachieved. It looked like a real contender, and they sort of fired up that offseason as if that was the case, and they went hard after these veteran moves. Trading for Laramie Tunsil, bringing in a Deebo Samuel. They were making moves as if they expected to be a contender last season. But when you looked at it on paper heading into that year, you're like, this defense does not look like the kind of group that can match that unless, some very young, unproven players play extremely well. Trey Amos right out of the gate, or Johnny Newton, becomes a star. Like, it was going to need something like that for this defense to hold up its end of the bargain, and it just didn't happen. So the defense was rough. Obviously, the offense took a step backwards. Jaden Daniels was hurt and not quite the same guy year two, and suddenly none of what was expected kind of manifest last year.
All right, so let's fix it. Where do you want to start? Let's start with free agency. What are some of your ideas?
Yeah, so I think, the good thing is this team, it's got some money to play with. They can absolutely be players in the free agent marketplace. They can absolutely be a factor. And, I think it's a good team for this lesson because, generally speaking, I think free agency, gone are the days when elite players are hitting the market at the peak of their powers, the peak of their earning potential. The guy that always comes to mind for that is Albert Haynesworth. And obviously Washington was the team that went after Albert Haynesworth, and it didn't work out. But I think generally those guys are not hitting the market anymore. But that doesn't mean there's no good players to be brought in or there's no smart money to be spent in free agency. I think you can get a lot of useful, role players, a lot of useful starters, a lot of contributors. You're just not getting the sort of market resetting superstar anymore.
All right, so let's start with edge. Who's worth it for Washington to go after? They have Dorrance Armstrong coming off an injury. He played actually very well before he got hurt in Week 7 against the Cowboys. Dietrich Wise they brought back the other day. He's more of an edge-setting run stopper. It's a new defensive coordinator, Sam. Durante Jones coming from Minnesota. You're very familiar with the Vikings and Brian Flores' system. So is there, would you go after Trey Hendrickson, or would it be a Boye Mafe or an Owe? Like, how would you address a significant need, which is they've got to generate pass rush?
Yeah, so obviously a lot of it is going to depend, what the market is for some of these guys, and it's always difficult to gauge that from the outside and know exactly what the asks are. I wouldn't go near the Trey Hendrickson thing. I think given his age, given the likely area that he's going to be playing in terms of salary, I would let somebody else do that. But I'd absolutely be interested in talking to Jalen Phillips, from Philadelphia. He'd been with Miami. Injuries are a concern for him, but when he plays, I think he's an impactful and versatile defensive lineman that can move around, that can do a bit of everything. I'd absolutely be interested in the Odafe Owe marketplace. I think he does get a lot of pressure. I think he's athletic enough to potentially do some dropping into coverage, do some of the sort of confusing elements in disguise that Minnesota has certainly done for years. And I would imagine we're going to see more of in Washington this year. Caleb on Chason is coming off a really good year for New England. sort of former draft bust, really. A high draft pick that had never been the guy that he was supposed to be, but all of a sudden he was consistently making plays for the Patriots. And again, a guy that's got experience, dropping into coverage, doing a bunch of different things from that defensive line. I don't know if his market is going to be anything, but if he's a cheap option, I'd absolutely be intrigued in bringing him in.
Here's a name for you. Just curious as to what you think, because it's always been a player when I've watched him. I've thought, like, especially maybe in a Brian Flores style scheme, and he's down the list here, and so it's not going to be a lot of money. I think he's played in Buffalo at a high level at times, certainly as a playmaker. Do you like AJ Epinesa?
Yeah, I do. I think Epinesa is, an interesting player I think he's been pretty inconsistent in his NFL career, but I think he's got some ability, and is, in his prime, is a big, long, powerful player that his high-end play has been impressive. There's just never been enough of it. And again, like a guy that was a pretty high draft pick, not a first rounder, but a second round player that never quite became the player that he was supposed to be for the Bills. But I think AJ Epinesa as part of a rotation is absolutely a useful player to have in your, if you go sort of 7 deep on that defensive line, I think AJ Epinesa is definitely one of the guys that can get, 400 snaps for you and be a useful player.
Why not on Trey Hendrickson?
I think he's just a little bit too old to be sure of that salary. He's the whole Cincinnati thing has really not worked out in his favor in that he didn't get the contract that he was looking to get. He's already 31. He'll be 32 during the season, and for the last few years, he's been up there with Myles Garrett and TJ Watt as one of the best edge rushers in the NFL. Well, those guys got absolutely monster, top of the market contracts. Hendrickson should, by all rights, be targeting that kind of money. And I just think you're going to feel far more concerned of giving him that money than you were certainly Myles Garrett, because he's that little bit older and he's coming off an injury now. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe his contract demands are going to be much lower than that. And if they are, then maybe you're in the Trey Hendrickson market. But for where I think that contract is going to end up, I would just let somebody else gamble on when age becomes a factor for him.
Is there a corner, because they have a need there? I mean, they've got a need almost everywhere on defense. Right. Is there a corner that you think would fit maybe a Brian Flores style scheme? That's what we're thinking here next year with Durante Jones as the defensive coordinator. Give me a corner or two. I actually think there's a chance that they re-sign Jonathan Jones, who's a little bit older, actually didn't play that poorly. They'll have Trey Amos coming back off the injury, who played pretty well as a rookie. Sandra still's here. But give me a corner that you think is a possibility for them.
Yeah, it's an interesting year for corners. There's a lot of risk associated with kind of all the guys. So it's really what is the thing? What is the red flag? What is the scary element of these guys that you're most comfortable with? Greg Newsome is someone I'd be interested in kicking the tires on. And coming out of Jacksonville, he'd been a Browns former first-round pick, and has got some high-end play on his resume, but is not coming off the best of that play for a long time. Asante Samuel Jr., now that he's healthy, I mean, he didn't get signed for basically all of last offseason. It really dragged late because he was coming off injuries and really wasn't healthy enough to play. But late in the year, we saw him get on the field for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, if you assume another kind of 6 months into his recovery, Asante Samuel's a potential ball hawk type of corner, sticky in zone coverage, the kind of guy that can make plays. It's going to depend on what his health is like, but if your medical staff clears him, I think Samuel is definitely someone that could be a really interesting buy low type of player. And then Rick Woolen from Seattle, he's incredibly athletic, had an amazing rookie season, regressed pretty hard the last couple of years, but I thought every time he got on the field this year actually was pretty impressive. And maybe maturity is a potential issue for him. I mean, he had one of the dumbest penalties I've seen anybody commit last year. But, again, if you're comfortable that was just a rush of blood to the head as opposed to a kind of serial concern for him, he's certainly a talented player to potentially invest in.
Of the following four players, if I told you they signed one of them, which would be the best fit? Tremaine Edmonds, Quay Walker, Devin Lloyd, Nakobe Dean.
Nakobe Dean, you would imagine, would be an awful lot cheaper than the other one. So in terms of value, Nakobe Dean might be the guy to target from that group, just because I suspect he's going to come at pennies on the dollar relative to the other ones. I think Devin Lloyd is the best player of the group, but I also think he'll command the most money as well. So I think it's either go big with Devin Lloyd, pay the big money, get the talented player hitting the market, second contract guy right at the right time, or you go for the bargain basement version and you bring in Nakobe Dean and hope that he can stay healthy and be that guy. I wouldn't want any part of Quay Walker. I think he's still more of an athlete than he is a football player, and kind of always has been. Tremaine Edmonds is definitely intriguing, but he's incredibly athletic. They ask him to do an awful lot of difficult things, but I think the idea of Tremaine Edmonds has always been better than the player Tremaine Edmonds.
If they brought Bobby Wagner back, do you think that would be an issue?
No, Bobby Wagner can still play. Now, he can't play the way he used to in Seattle, and, you need to change your requirements for Bobby Wagner. You can't necessarily ask him to do some of the things that he did earlier in his career, operate out in space, cover serious ground in coverage. But if you understand what Bobby Wagner is now and you put him in the position to succeed, he can still play at a really high level. He's a really good player still.
All right, let's flip it to offense. Would you do Brandon Ayuk or not?
So Ayuk is a total wild card at this point. Now, Washington has a kind of unique insight into him with Jaden Daniels and that connection there. Maybe if your quarterback vouches for him and says, look, he's 100% going to be on the straight and narrow, we can keep him together, then it is a potential buy low opportunity that rarely comes along.
Right.
He's a top 10 caliber playmaker at wide receiver. He could turbocharge an offense and, give your young quarterback an absolute superstar to go along with Terry McLaurin and the players that are already there. But, I can't think of a situation like this before, where a guy is basically down tools, run himself out of the building immediately after getting paid. Usually that kind of thing, if it ever happens before, is, an unwise negotiating tactic to try and get paid. Hassan Reddick kind of did something like this for Philadelphia, but that was to try and get a contract done, not after the contract is signed. So it's incredibly unusual, and means he comes with a massive risk. If you're bringing in Ayuk, you are assuming if this lasts a year, it's been a success.
Wide receiver, they're going to add a wide receiver, if not two, because part of it, Sam, is that Terry very likely is going to be playing his last year. His, cap number balloons in 27 to 34 million to 39 plus million in 28. He got a 1-year contract extension for all intents and purposes last summer. And, look, if he plays great, they'll try to figure something out. But they also are likely not to bring back Deebo Samuel. They only have 3 receivers under contract right now: Luke McCaffrey, Jalen Lane, who's their punt returner, and Terry McLaurin. So I think we are all expecting here in D.C. that they are active in free agency to begin with, and that wide receiver and maybe even tight end and running back are a part of the equation. So who do you like? Wide receivers, let's just say after, Pickens, obviously, and Pierce, in that next group after them. Let's just say they don't spend the big money on Pierce unless you think they absolutely should.
I think Pierce is definitely an option for them still. The problem is, like you said, it's going to be big money. Most of the NFL, I think, is interested in Alec Pierce. I didn't really expect him to hit the market, but obviously they used their tag on Daniel Jones, and so Alec Pierce is going to be available unless he takes a massive hometown discount in the next few days and stops himself hitting the open market, which I can't imagine why he would do. I would at least be in the conversation there, and until the number goes so high that you draw a line in the sand and let somebody else go there. Juwan Jennings, I think, is a really interesting name. Again, a San Francisco connection, so they would have some insight into him. Jennings, I think, is primed to step into a bigger role than he's had for the 49ers. He's a great blocker. He's fearless over the middle. He's a playmaker as well. He's got some dynamism to him. Romeo Doubs from Green Bay, I think, is just a really solid, very good number 2 receiver, and that would upgrade the receiving core. And then I think you've got a bunch of kind of lower down, not quite one-trick pony players, but more limited receivers, like specific skill sets I think you could bring in. Guys like Jalen Naylor from Minnesota is, I think, an intriguing speed receiver that was actually pretty good for them last year when most of their higher name receivers really weren't. I think there's definitely players you can bring in 2 guys maybe in free agency and absolutely kind of overhaul this receiving core without breaking the bank on huge money for any one of them.
Different style player, but do you think Wan'Dale Robinson's a bit under the radar? I mean, I was shocked when I looked at his production. You know, I always thought watching him, he's better than people think he is. I had no idea until recently. He's gone 92 and 93 receptions in his last 2 seasons. Is there going to be a market and a decent-sized one for him?
I think there should be, yeah. I mean, he's an interesting player because obviously really small guy. Yeah. I think he's under 5'9", kind of this classic slot receiver, high volume, underneath chain moving type of player. And then all of a sudden last season, it's like his average depth of target almost doubled. He was making a ton of plays deep down the field. And all of a sudden there's this deep threat that's emerged out of nowhere. I think some of that is connected to the way Jackson Dart played the game and extending plays and running around behind the line of scrimmage and kind of manufacturing some scramble drill opportunities types of things. Now, some of that translates with Jaden Daniels. You know, you're going to have some of those plays with him as well. So it's not like that skill set disappears if he came over to Washington. But I do think he showed last season there's more to his game than was given credit for before that. So, yeah, I would be really interested in Wan'Dale Robinson. For a lot of teams in the NFL, I'd be calling up his representatives, finding out where that marketplace is, because if it's anything short of, you know, crazy money, I think he's a really good addition to most receiving corps.
If I told you they added a tight end, it's obviously not going to be Kyle Pitts, but it was somebody else who would be the best fit in Washington.
Yeah, I don't love the tight end market this offseason. I think there's some useful players, but maybe you're kind of short on that kind of guaranteed fix. David Njoku, I'd be interested in looking at. I think he showed a couple of years ago he was really a high-level receiver, dynamic player, can make plays after the catch. Last season was not a particularly strong year for him, and it's tough. Like, on the one hand, you would say, yeah, but look at the quarterback situation on Cleveland. And then the other hand, you would say, but that didn't affect Harold Fannin at all. The rookie tight end kind of taking his place there. So it's tough to know exactly what to do with that, but he's not that far removed from some really good play as a receiver. I'd definitely be intrigued by that. Cade Otton was a useful player in Tampa Bay, Baker Mayfield's favorite target at times, but I think he also sort of showed, where his ceiling is in terms of he's a solid player, but he's not going to be spectacular. But those are 2 guys I think that would definitely upgrade a group at tight end.
Who are the running backs you like? Because I think there's a chance they add one in free agency. First of all, where do you think Kenneth Walker III will land?
Yeah, there's a lot of talk that Kansas City is going to go in his direction. They tried to trade for Breece Hall last year during the season, balked at the asking price, wouldn't go to a 3rd-round pick. They wanted to give up a 4th. But I think it shows, they're playing at the higher end of that running back market. They're getting linked a lot to Jeremiah Love in the draft. That would be another option for them. But they might be the team that's willing to go to the big money for Kenneth Walker. I think it's a great year to pick up a running back in free agency. I think there's a lot of really good options. Tyler Algier has been the kind of the change-up guy to Bijan Robinson in Atlanta. He's a hammer as a running back. He's so consistent. Yeah. He's great in short yardage. He never fumbles. He's just a really, really solid running back that I think would be a great addition, again, to a lot of teams, but Washington in particular as well. Rashad White out of Tampa Bay, I think, has been a really useful part of a committee backfield. He'd be an interesting player to bring over as well. I think there's a couple of guys you could absolutely look at.
Yeah, you've mentioned some of the guys I love. I love Jennings, first of all, at wide receiver, especially for them, because they're going to go to more of, kind of a Shanahan style or Ben Johnson style offense with David Blau at coordinator, and I love Tyler Algier. I actually think Chigakonkwo would be a great fit for Washington, too, at tight end. You didn't mention him. Do you like him as a free agent signing? I mean, he's obviously not Pitts, and he's not at that upper tier. But what do you think of him?
I do like Okonkwo, but he's one of these classic players where it's like every single year you're kind of expecting more of him than you get.
No quarterback.
No, it is true, and it's always difficult to know how much the dependency of that. But every year he's like the fantasy player's dream. Every offseason, Every offseason, this is the Chig Okonkwo breakout season, and it never quite comes. And yeah, like you can always say, sometimes you've got to factor in his quarterback, but again, it's like that didn't stop Harold Fannin immediately with Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland. Sometimes if it's ever going to happen, these guys should be able to transcend the quarterback. And Cam Ward actually was playing pretty well last season for a lot of that year. Late on in the season, we started to see some real development from him, and it didn't really correspond with the Chig Okonkwo uptick in production. So I'm always going to buy into the idea that eventually maybe you'll get that breakout season, but at some point we should probably stop expecting it to happen.
Who do you like for Washington at 7? What would be the best case for them?
I would go for one of those defensive playmakers, particularly the pass rushers. I think, there's 3 high-end pass rushers, I think, that are being talked about at the top of this draft. They're all very different stylistically. You've got this power monster in Ruben Bain. Who knows how far he's going to slip because of this arm length issue, if at all. But I think if Ruben Bain is the guy that falls towards the bottom of the top 10 because suddenly teams are scared of his arm length, I think that has the potential to be just a steal in the draft. Like, let's just not overthink it. Let's get one of the most powerful, strong players we can find and just let him loose.
My guy is Bailey. I don't know that he makes it to 7. Probably doesn't. But do you have a favorite? Like if you're a Washington guy and you're like, God, I hope this guy drops to 7, who is that guy? Because, of course, it would be best case if it ends up being one of the pass rushers.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think they're very different players. Like this draft, if it has a flaw, it's that you don't have these sort of clean blue chip prospects that just they tick every box. There's no flaws. Like everyone agrees these guys are superstars. There's no Will Anderson Jr. There's no Nick Bosa. There's no guy that just ticks every box. Everybody's got something to be a little bit leery about. With Bailey, it's, is he going to hold up against the run? Is he only a pass rushing force? And maybe you're fine with that. You just say the run doesn't matter. We want the juice off the edge. That's our guy. Like his level of explosiveness, of twitchiness, it's next level in this draft class. So I think he'll absolutely be a high-end pass rusher. With Arvell Reese, you've got this projection element of, he's this hybrid player. He's been more of a linebacker. The edge rusher tape is pretty thin on the ground. You're doing an awful lot of projection to kind of assume that he can become the next Abdul Carter or Micah Parsons or, one of these guys that's going to transition down and become that edge rusher. But his tape is, spectacular. The juice is everywhere. It's there both as a linebacker and as a pass rushing force. So, a lot of people like the projection. They're comfortable with it. And then with Ruben Bain, you've got, look, that dude has been an absolute monster, but you have to at least acknowledge the fact that that arm length would be extremely rare for him to be a high-end playmaker at the next level. Like, you're basically almost in unprecedented territory, pending the idea that his arm's probably going to come in another inch long once he gets measured at his pro day. For some reason, the guy operating the tape measure at the combine has been really shortchanging people the last 2 years. So I love Ruben Bain, but I think I have no problem with any of those guys. I think if any of the 3 are available for Washington, it's a slam dunk.
All right. I want to finish up with this. Just tell me where this player lands. Best guess today on March 6th. I'm not holding you to it. Where does Max Crosby end up?
Max Crosby. A lot of talk is that Dallas are interested in him. I would be surprised if the Cowboys were into that. I could see Baltimore making that kind of move. This is the team that kind of got shocked to its core last season. They were not anywhere near the team they were supposed to be. It ended up costing John Harbaugh his job. They still have no kind of pass rush. I could see the Ravens talking themselves into a trade for Max Crosby as the solution to their troubles.
Malik Willis.
I think he ends up in Arizona. The connection there, the coaching connection is probably too strong.
All right. I actually just have one more for you. I had a bunch more, but I'm not going to take up any more of your time. But do you think Marcus Mariota stays in Washington as a backup, or do you think there's an opportunity for him in this, in the next few months to compete somewhere for a starting job?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the thing is I would be surprised if there was a starting opportunity available for Marcus Mariota, but there are going to be places where he has a much easier pathway to starting than in Washington. Like obviously Jaden Daniels is absolutely the starter there. It's not in question. It's a bit like Daniel Jones a year ago, right? Where he had to weigh up like where am I more likely to get starting opportunities? Is it Minnesota with JJ McCarthy? Is it Indianapolis with Anthony Richardson? And ultimately, I mean, as it ended up, he would have been starting in either spot eventually. So it didn't really matter, but he ended up choosing the Indianapolis Colts, deciding that was the better way, the better pathway to a starting gig. Marcus Mariota may well find an opportunity that gives him a much clearer pathway to starting games than in Washington.
Thanks for doing this, as always. Hope you're well.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Sam Monson, everybody from the 33rd team. Ben Standig will jump on with us next a little bit early today because at 12 noon it all gets started. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com. All right. Ben Standing's with us an hour early today on a day that promises to be pretty busy at 12 noon, although it's been pretty busy so far with trades. We're seeing a lot of trades happen and a couple of releases. The Dolphins intend on releasing Tua Tagovailoa. That's certainly not a big surprise. And the Cowboys have now reportedly traded for Rashawn Gary. It would be a late round 2027 draft pick. Schefter reporting the Cowboys were definitely in on Max Crosby. There was some thought that they would certainly be in the market for Trey Hendrickson, and maybe they still are. But Rashawn Gary to the Cowboys for a 2027 fourth round pick is out there right now. All right, joining us. Also, the Dolphins are trading 5-time Pro Bowl safety Minkah Fitzpatrick to the Jets. God, has he moved around for a talented player. All right, joining us right now is our friend Ben Standig. Of course, he is our Washington insider on this show, joining us Mondays, Wednesdays, and sometimes in between. He is writing pretty much hourly on his Substack, Last Man Standig. You should follow him on X, on Twitter, at Ben Standig. So here we are an hour away from starting to find out some things for sure. So let's start taking some guesses. I'll let you begin. I talked a little bit about what I think, I'd like to see happen and some of the things that wouldn't surprise me if they happened. What are you thinking right now?
Yeah, it's considering it's only an hour to go before this whole thing opens. It is still kind of hard to figure out where they're going to go because of the fact that, again, they could do almost anything. I've heard like at the receiver position, for example. I've heard them mentioned with some of the guys we see at the top of the lists, and I've seen guys mentioned towards the bottom, or not towards the bottom, but further down the list.
Yeah,
and either way you could justify it. You need a bigger play guy opposite Terry that's going to cost you some money. Cool. On the other hand, if you really are going to be in the market for Brandon Ayuk, then I don't know if you're going to also then spend money to get a Romeo Doubs or someone like that. And maybe they decide, hey, we think, between the pieces that we still have, if we add like a Tyquan Thornton to give us that sort of De'Ami Brown speed, maybe that's the type of move. And then they use that money in other directions. So, I hate being feeling this uncertain, but that's just the reality of the deal. They could go in so many different directions. This is like a choose your own adventure situation with them. So, and of course, they are. I know there's a lot of rumors out there. People, especially like yesterday, it seemed like every 10 minutes somebody out was putting another report linking them. It was something about Kenneth Walker. Maybe my understanding is that's not a thing.
Yeah.
I don't. And then there's the Alec Pierce, Tyler Lindenbaum. I don't know. I've heard there's at least, checking in, but I don't know if they're really going to go that aggressive for a second receiver and a center. But, obviously if they go that route, then that changes everything. And if they go for the more, mid-level guys, because they need so many bodies, that's the other thing. Everybody talks about being active. I was just talking about this with Max. They have to be active. They only have 51 players on the roster.
Right.
That part's not interesting. The question is, what level of aggressiveness are they going to be?
Yeah, actually, when you think about it, here we are at the beginning of it, and Tressway, Andrew Wiley, Dietrich Wise, Drake Jackson, Shai Tuttle, Treylon Burks, Jake Moody. I would have thought personally, and of course there is, the very likely possibility that they've talked to a lot more of their own players, but those players, specifically a guy like Chris Paul, who clearly is going to have a market, are saying, yeah, not now. I want to see what my value is on the open market. But I still thought perhaps there would be more that would have been done with their own, given the number of roster spots that they have to fill, the second most in the league behind the Ravens. They extended Allegretti. I guess he spoke today, but he's not penciled in at center at this point. And they cut Marshawn Lattimore. That's basically what they've done so far. I don't think I've missed anything. Were they in on any of these trades? Not that I know of. You?
Not that I know of. Obviously, it's one thing to trade, somebody for like a 7th round pick, okay. But like in terms of like trading away, top picks, they don't have any to do it. So
yeah.
I just don't.
They do. They just it's number 7 overall, and they're not going to part with that.
Well, yeah. Also, I just mean in general, like they just don't have enough picks. They only have the 2 in the top 100, and I'm not. Yeah, so they just don't have the ammunition that other teams do right now to get involved, even if they wanted to, for the most part. So yeah, and look, I think I talked about this last week with you. I think the other big component to me here is, what is Adam Peters' mindset? What is their mindset broadly? If they're still in the mode of where they came in 2024 of, look, we're not going to overspend in free agency. We're gonna look for value. We're gonna build this thing up so we have a consistent contender over time. Okay, cool. Well, that could mean signing almost anybody for sure, and that also can mean Adam Peters staying within his approach that we have seen, whether it's in free agency or in negotiations with Terry McLaurin, where he's hey, this is where we're at. We're really not going to be budged that much based on the signings that they have made so far. The ones you just went through. They all look to me like guys that either wanted to come back here or probably didn't have too many other options. Like they didn't, I don't know if they want to bring back definitively Chris Paul or Debo or Jacob Martin or Bobby Wagner, but like those guys have options, and those guys didn't come back. Now, again, maybe they didn't want them back, but I'm just saying, like, it's not like they haven't signed anybody that like they had to, put in that extra couple bucks to get it done that I can tell. And I know I know they're negotiating or talking with some other guys and have communication. Right. I know there's been interest with Jacob Martin, but whatever was done there, it hasn't been done. So I think that's a big part of where's Peters' approach here.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think they would have preferred to have had a deal done with Jacob Martin by now. But they don't, and they have to. So one of the things we can establish without question is they have a lot of players to add. So that equals being busy. The kind of busy we're not so sure of. Is it going to be a lot of players that are mid-tier to lower tier and a lot of 1-year deals and maybe, a handful of 3-year deals like in 2024 or even last year? Or is it going to be a couple of big splash moves with the rest filled in? Or is it going to be a lot of splash moves? We're not sure about that part, but they are going to be busy. So let's go down what we would want if we were GM, because that's the only thing we can really do other than a couple of hunches here and there and maybe even some reporting that'll start to come out. Let's start on offense, because one of the things that I think I've learned here over the last couple of weeks is that they're going to be a lot busier on offense than maybe I would have thought when the season ended. Like, as an example, we weren't sure that they needed to do anything with the offensive line other than bring Chris Paul back, and they've released Tyler Biotish, and they're probably going to lose Chris Paul, or there's certainly a good chance they're going to lose Chris Paul. 2/5 of the offensive line they've got to replace with starters. And then the running back thing has been definitely an interesting reveal, because I think it's another area of the team, Ben, we would have all said, not bad. They don't have to do anything, but I think they are going to do something. So I think offensively, I want to start there, because unless you think I'm wrong, I think there are going to be several players added offensively and maybe some significant ones.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like you said, at a minimum, you got to have at least one offensive line starter level player, maybe Brandon Coleman and some combination of Coleman, Allegretti, Wiley as the left guard, but you got to, still imagine they need something either for center or for guard. Receiver, arguably, receiver number 2 and 3 are not currently on the roster. You can make the argument.
Right.
If you make me bet, I would bet that Adam Peters leans into running it with Ben Sinnott and John Bates and look to add depth rather than necessarily a frontline guy, because I would bet that he wants to see Ben Sinnott get a real shot after picking him in the second round a couple of years ago. And then, you mentioned running back. Like, I've sort of pulled off of the idea that they're going to go for maybe a frontline guy, but, more of a complementary piece to Bill. We've talked in the past about like a Rashard White, who, from my understanding, is going to bolt from Tampa. The question is, where does he go? He makes a lot of sense here as a guy that's averaged 50 catches a game the last 4 years. And also, yes, he played college football, Jaden Daniels, so that's a thing. So, yeah, I mean, they're definitely going to add pieces. And, I talked about this with you. I've written about this, talked about it on my own podcast, that for all, like, the easy thing to say is they need to fix the defense, and we all understand that. But we also can't forget, like, this is potentially the last year that Jaden Daniels is playing on a rookie contract. You know, maybe it's 2 years, we'll see. But, like, whatever it is.
No, it's most likely the last year.
Okay, whatever it is, the window is closing soon. Are you going forward or are you not? If you just sort of go 50, like in 2024, if you look at the guys they signed to multi-year deals, guys they gave one-year deals but some good money, and then their top 4 draft picks, that was split dead even offense defense. If they do that again, I just don't know that makes much of a difference for the defense. I would say build around your quarterback. The best way for this team, the fastest way, the most logical way for this team to contend is get Jaden Daniels help. And I know sometimes we all act like he's already Mahomes or already like at that sort of level. Last year was a redshirt year. It wasn't necessarily his fault. Injuries happened, but nothing happened, right? So let's not put all the burden on him. Get him more help. Like, I wouldn't personally go out and spend $20 million on a center, but at least if they did, I'm fine with spending on the offensive line. You know, I'm not necessarily a big fan of spending huge on 2 receivers, but in this case, I don't know if Terry McLaurin's going to be here after this year. So if they do,
right,
cool. Like, build up the defense, the offense. The defense, look, you still have to add. I think they'll add an edge rusher or 2, and they can still draft somebody at 7, of course. And they'll have to fill in other gaps. They need a corner, linebacker, et cetera. But it's a matter of where you spend it. And I think the best bang for the buck is going to be on the offense.
I think so, too. So let's start there, specifically with the offensive line, because that's where you began. And you just said $20 million for a center. Well, that's Tyler Linderbaum. That would be a big bomb, Shell, if they were to spend $20 million a year on a center. But they cut Tyler Biotish. So they must have had something in mind other than, hey, we extended Nick Allegretti. He's our new center. I'm guessing that they had something else on their mind. So let's start there. Do you think they end up signing a center in free agency? And if so, who?
Well, I expect them to sign an interior offensive lineman. I mean, I've heard of some other names of like sort of more starters, but like guys who are not necessarily, you know, they're not going to move the needle per se. So Linderbaum might be one end of the extreme, but there's other guys that they're looking at. Again, they've got, as all teams do, but in their case, they got a lot of contingency plans. I mean, Linderbaum would be fascinating. Again, it seems odd because you've already invested a lot in the line and they haven't even, extended Tunsil yet. But look, Linderbaum's 26, right? I was talking about this on my podcast yesterday with Mark Bullock, and he pointed out, hey, he's 26. You potentially could get 2 contracts out of this guy and pair him with your quarterback for all this time. I mean, that's not a bad way to look at it. We talk about this with receiver. Don't you want a center, to be with the quarterback for as many years as possible, the way like Jeff Saturday and Peyton Manning were? So again, I wouldn't probably do it, but I can sort of see the logic there. And then beyond that, look, I mean, there's a bunch of, like Isaac Samolo from the Steelers is out there. Yeah. There's a bunch of like like solid guys who can play these spots. But, again, they need depth there probably as much as anything. And they think Allegretti could go if needed, but I think they'll bring in at minimum competition for that spot. And again, if it's Linderbaum, then it could be, something much more significant.
All right, 2 new wide receivers, I think, are a given. So give me your best guesses on that. By the way, I think Linderbaum's going to end up signing elsewhere. It doesn't mean that there aren't other, like you said, interior offensive linemen that they could upgrade at guard. With the kid from Pittsburgh, I doubt it would be a Bettino from Cleveland because he's like 35 years old, but it might be for, that could be one of those, what short-term deals, who knows? But let's talk about wide receivers, because I would bet that they're adding at least 1, if not 2, through free agency. What are your guesses?
Yeah, I think they have to probably add at least 2 somehow. I mean, what they have right now is, Terry McLaurin, cool. And you've got, I think, 3 reserves in Traylon Burks, Luke McCaffrey, Jalen Lane. Now, maybe McCaffrey or Lane ends up being your slot guy, but as of today, I'm not going to say credited pen that they're the guy. So on the higher end, I think a guy like Romeo Doubs to me makes a lot of sense. I know that they've at least shown some interest in him. He's probably more of your all-around threat. He's got good size, good speed, really good route runner. Green Bay was always sort of playing receiver by committee, so his numbers weren't always strong, but I think he's a pretty solid option that would be a pretty consistent one for Daniels. But look, they also need that pure speed element. I've mentioned Tyquan Thornton before, former second-round pick by the Patriots. Hasn't really impressed a ton in his 4 years in the league, but he averaged 21 yards a catch last year on about 19 receptions. He ran a 4.28 40 as a 2022 combine. He's 6'2". So there's a lot there to work with, and that would be more in that like $5 million a year range, right? So I think like you could go a combination like that. But here's the thing again, if you go out and sign a Dobbs or a Jawan Jennings or a Mike Evans or whoever you want to say, that would to me mean you're not going for Brandon Ayuk, because whatever Brandon Ayuk is going to get, 1 year deal, sure, that seems logical. But the money, unless he's taking a minimum or something, how would that work? And even if he were, there's only so many spaces out there on the field, right? You can't, you can't just say, we'll bring out 3 or 4 receivers and we'll figure it out. So, that's the other part. If they really are in on Ayuk, then they probably would go more to that Thornton level of receiver than the top end. And that, again, is going to be really interesting to see what they do.
Yeah, I am going to lean in the direction of no on Ayuk. It's just a gut that I have, and more on sort of a combination of a Jawan Jennings and Wan'Dale Robinson, maybe not even Wan'Dale Robinson, but somebody like that, or, a Dobbs and somebody else. It would surprise me if it were Pierce. Everything I've read about Pierce is that he and Daniel Jones are the best of friends and that he'd actually like to stay in Indianapolis. But that would be something that I'd actually love. I'd love Jawan Jennings as a part of this, to add Jawan Jennings to Terry McLaurin and maybe a better pass catching tight end than we know that they have right now, because we don't know that they have that in Ben Sinnott. So somebody like an Okonkwo would or likely would be interesting to me, along with, an inside receiver. What about running back?
And just quickly on the receiver, you mentioned Pierce, and I'm with you. It doesn't seem to make sense. We'll note he is represented by the same agents that represent Adam Peters. So at a minimum, I think Adam Peters will be aware of what's going on if he wants to get involved. But that would seem to be, unless they view him as a number one when should Terry move on after this year. But he hasn't even
look. Brandon Ayuk would be, if Ayuk is healthy, Ben, and you end up picking him up, and he's the Brandon Ayuk of 2 years, he's your number one this year.
Yeah, for sure. This year, yeah. Okay, we'll see. Yeah.
I'm just saying, if he's healthy, if he's Brandon Ayuk of 2023, that's a big if. But Brandon Ayuk in 2023 was a better receiver than Terry McLaurin, in my opinion.
It's not even the physical with him. It's just, I think we talked about this the other day.
Of course.
If you're willing to blow up that massive contract you had, you're willing to, who knows what else you're going to blow up, like a team in the locker room. So that would be hard for me. You mentioned running back. I think for me at this point, I think there was some, they were kicking the tires a little bit on a guy like a Tyler Algier. Like I said, I never quite have had the sense that they were in on Kenneth Walker at all. But when you look at where they are, like on the one hand, if you tell me they bring back Bill and Chris Rodriguez, who's a restricted free agent, and McNichols, who's an unrestricted free agent right now, and roll with that, okay. You could probably use a little bit of a better pass catcher, but for where they're at, for all the holes, like that's not the worst case to be, especially if you think you're building up the offensive line. But, again, Rachaad White, if we're going to play the Jaden Daniels game, the guy played at college with Daniels, like, to me, that's a guy that makes a ton of sense. There are other running backs you could point to, like a Kenneth Gainwell. I haven't really heard anything on him per se, but somebody like that. And I think the key is also, in terms of the draft, like this is not being viewed as like a deep running back class. So if they do want to make a play, and considering their limited asset cap, assets in the draft, I think you probably need to do it here. So that wouldn't surprise me. And again, let's see, Chris Rodriguez, they have not picked up his tender yet. They have a couple more days, but to me, it reads like they're seeing what they can do in free agency. And if they get somebody, then they probably move on. But if not, they can always pick that tender up and roll it back with him.
Yeah, I mean, my preference would be Algier. It wouldn't surprise me if Rico Dowdle ends up being the guy for them. All right, so tight end, you think they won't do anything at tight end? You think there's some belief in Sinnott and Bates and, whatever else they roll out, including the guy that they did actually re-sign, number 89 from Cager from last year's preseason, who he was actually pretty impressive as a size, hands catching, pass catching tight end. But you think net they don't do anything major at tight end?
This is just my gut, but yeah, that's kind of my read. I mean, again, so many of the decisions that get made, whether it's picking, re-signing a guy, who makes the team, whatever, people can say what they want in these executive positions, but a lot of it comes down to, did you pick the guy? Did you sign the guy? You're going to give a little bit more grace there, that type of thing. And, of the draft, we know we need to see more from those second-round draft picks or those day 2 picks from 2024 across the board. But the one guy that really hasn't had a chance to play much is Ben Sinnott, and he just was not a fit for what Kingsbury wanted to do. We'll see what David Blau incorporates, if they get him on the field more as like an H-back, fullback type, what have you. I think they do need to bring in another piece to help. It should Sinnott not be good to go. I think a guy like a Greg Dulcich could make some sense. He's battled injuries in his career, but he did play last year, had over 20 catches. He's also a UCLA guy. We know Adam Peters is not afraid to take players from his alma mater. So I think that is the type of signing you could make where, there's some upside there, and could fill in should you need another receiver if Ben Sinnott doesn't play out. But I think they want to see, if you go out and sign another like Kid Okongwu would be great. I would be down with that. But you do that now, Ben Sinnott's just never going to play in terms of like worthy of a second round pick. And I don't think he's shown he can't play. I just don't think he has played. So that would be my read on that one.
All right, let's flip it to the other side of the football. So they need everything. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, last year I said, well, I think we all said, well, they're definitely going to add some edge rushers, right? Somewhere? Well, then they didn't really do that at all. So I'm going to...
Well, not rusher, but they did add an edge-setting run stopper in Dietrich Wise.
Yeah, but yes. I mean, even that, I mean, cool with him, but, a role player more or less, not somebody with a significant investment. So, you think they would do that this time.
Kinlaw was the defensive investment last year.
Right. So from my understanding, they have certainly looked around the edge market. And I think the question that, from what I've heard, people are asking is, well, how aggressive will they be? It's not a matter of interest. It's a matter of what are they going to do? And that's what we just talked about before. But there's a bunch of edge guys. And I think to me, it's more like there's a lot of guys who are like 26, 27 coming off their rookie contracts, like a Boye Mafe from Seattle, Albert Ebiketie down in Atlanta, Owe with the Chargers, AJ Epinesa up in Buffalo. Like all these guys are sort of the same age. Like none of them are like flat out, you just got an absolute stud at edge, but they all have potential. And for whatever the reason, maybe they've, just haven't had that full opportunity, or maybe they just haven't been able to deliver. And that's what the scouts.
So is that where you're leaning instead of a Hendrickson, instead of a Phillips, instead of, maybe trading for Grenard? By the way, it could be a combination of both of these. But are you leaning more in that Mafe, Owe, second and a half tier below Hendrickson? I like Owe, by the way. I thought he played big, especially after the trade, and he played big in their biggest games last year. There's some Dorrance Armstrong vibes to Owe with the way he finished the season with the Chargers. But what's your thinking?
Yeah, I'm thinking that more than the Hendrickson. I mean, Phillips, something tells me he stays with Philly. I mean, Philly has a bunch of free agents, but he's the one that's like, there's a risk because he's had a lot of injuries, but the upside is pretty apparent. And, I think Philly's a smart team that knows to reinvest in the core position. So I don't know he gets out of Philly, but sure, I think he could be interesting. I just think the market for him is going to go out of hand. And, these, like I said, these younger guys, it's not the same as Hendrickson or Phillips in terms of what they have shown, but there's still some potential there. And again, they don't just need one defensive end. They arguably need like three. I mean, they have, even if we assume that Armstrong is ready for week 1, we don't know what shape he'll be in exactly in terms of football shape. And, they need a bunch more. And yeah, sure, they can use the 7th pick on a Reuben Bain or whatever if they want to do that. But that's, another 6 weeks or so away. So, yeah, they need multiple guys. That's why to me, I don't think Trey Hendrickson change. He'll help, obviously, but I think they need more bodies than just one guy. So that would be my guess that they would go down that route. And again, like that's also a matter of getting younger, right? I mean, Trey Hendrickson's a hell of a player, but he is 31. And if their goal is to get younger, then, like I said, the guys I was just pointing at are all in their 20s still, can grow. And I think that's what I would like to see them do. And
Look,
I think
this seems, almost counter to how long they've been in the league. But Daron Payne and Javon Kinlaw are still in their 20s. Like they're both 28 years old. These should be their prime years. And then obviously they've got a young player in Newton, and I'm talking about interior wise. And Dorrance Armstrong's not an old player. He's 27 or 28 years old. But yeah, they've got a lot to add there. There's no doubt about it. All right, let me just, I know we've talked about this before, and we're talking to Ben Standing, of course. I still think a sneaky area of need is interior. Like I think Duran, I think if they didn't have the need that they have along the defensive line, I'd wonder if Duran's even back right now at the cap number, and that they may have moved on from him. But they've got a plan for life without Duran, which is more likely than not in 2027. It wouldn't surprise me if they sign an interior D tackle. I mean, Hargrave is out there, who played for Durante Jones. By the way, Eric Wilson, who I think a lot of us thought, hey, he's a guy, so reliable, veteran player, and maybe he re-signed in Minnesota. He's staying with Brian Flores. And I don't know if Washington was interested or not. But do you think D tackle's a possibility? I mean, we've talked about it like an Eddie Goldman type for, nose. But I'm talking about somebody else that's big and isn't obviously a stand-up edge pass rushing, 3-4 linebacker outside edge.
I mean, if there's somebody there that they think can, be that sort of classic nose that can take on multiple blockers and clear up space for everybody else, I think that type of player could make sense. But if you're really looking at like a 3-4 set with like, say Frankie Louvu and, Abikete or somebody coming off the edge, then you need who's going to be the three guys up front there. I think Daron Payne, Javon Kinlaw, and Newton all make sense as 3-4 ends, but I don't know if any of them make sense as an interior tackle in a 3-4. So, I think they do need somebody else potentially in that group. But, again, I don't know if that's where they're going to make a big spend because they do have these other bodies and they may feel that they can get by with rotation. Like that's a weird spot, right? Minnesota signed Hargrave and our old friend Jonathan Allen last year, and they cut them both. And I think it partly, you could say it's salary cap or whatever, but also I think it's partly it didn't fit because both of those guys are traditional defensive tackles asked to sort of play, in the role of take on blockers, and that just didn't quite work, I don't think. So it doesn't necessarily have to be some stud, but it has to be somebody who specifically can, again, absorb the block, clear space for the linebackers, and others to make plays. If they can find that guy, sure. But I don't think it's just sort of like get in another tackle. It's got to be somebody who specifically helps in that regard.
And no, for my guy Nick, I did not forget Frankie Louvu. I think Frankie Louvu will be a good fit for this defense as a potential edge rusher. I do. He's also going to be clearly a linebacker and an every down player. And if they lose Bobby Wagner, and we don't know that's the case, there is the thought of Jordan McGee, but let's move to linebacker next, a Devin Lloyd and a Kobe Dean. There are guys out there, Quay Walker. Do you have any sense as to whether or not they'll add in that area?
This to me is sort of the mystery box position because I just haven't heard a ton about those guys you just mentioned. But boy, it would make a lot of sense to add that guy for what this defense could look like. You mentioned Eric Wilson, like that's what he does. He's from Minnesota, that inside linebacker.
Yep.
And they're going to, I mean, again, one way or the other, they're going to need more bodies. I'm assuming Bobby Wagner is probably not going to be back. So they've got to get more help. And yet, the guys you just mentioned, that's top of the market guys. Devin Lloyd, I don't know. I kind of get the feeling he goes back to Jacksonville. But Quay Walker, I mean, Green Bay just acquired another Zaire Franklin from the Colts, an inside linebacker, signaling that Walker's probably not back. Yeah. And with Nakobe Dean, again, Philadelphia has a bunch of free agents, and the way they operate, I don't know that they're going to go with spend on the off-ball linebacker when they have a defensive end and some other spots they got to shore up. So I think those guys could be available. I think Leo Chenal from the Chiefs is another guy who's very versatile, who would seemingly fit with what Durante Jones does. So it wouldn't surprise me if they did that, but I honestly just have not heard much about that. The other positions we've talked about, and one we'll get to, yes, but not so much that one.
Corner. There's actually a couple of guys that I like that I think are playmakers and would look good in sort of a Minnesota defense, and I'm projecting that to be our defense, like an AJ Epineza, who's just been a playmaker constantly. He's also really good against the run. You can use him in a lot of ways, and he's probably not, a big money signing. I like Dean more than Lloyd and Walker, but I don't know that it's the fit for them. Like it's, you're kind of projecting on what that defense will look like. But corner's going to be interesting. I think you and I had this conversation going back to like maybe a month ago, and I think we both were on the same page, although it hasn't happened. I thought there was a decent chance that Jonathan Jones would return. He still might. But I thought he played pretty well for them last year. And he's a veteran guy that they can rely on. He's older for sure. But, I mean, right now you got Amos and you got Sanders still. And that's it. Those are your corners under contract currently. I don't think there's another corner currently under contract.
Yeah, like when they re-signed Wiley, so to prevent him from hitting free agency, obviously he wanted to stay, but that was also because hey, we are uncomfortable not having a backup tackle, and he can play some other spots. We need that locked in. We're not worrying about taking up that spot on the depth chart. I think with corner, I think they're keeping their options open in terms of the depth chart. Now I've heard that the two sides with Jones that there's been conversation, but not enough to move the needle. Again, maybe we'll see what happens here in free agency if they make a one big signing. There's several interesting corners. I think the other variable here is how do they view Mikey Sanders still? Feels like we keep talking about this. If they view him as an outside guy, then that could mean a guy like Taylor from the Saints, who's one of the better corner options. He's a real slot guy. Like maybe you go down that route. If they're putting Sanders still back in the slot, then you have guys like Jamel Dean, Cordell Flott from the Giants is interesting. He played for Durante Jones at LSU, and he actually had a pretty good year with the Giants. So he knows the division and all that. So I think that's, if they figure out that, then I think it makes it a little bit easier to come back to Jones. Or look, they could add multiple guys without question. But yeah, I think Jones is still in play. But again, I don't think they want to take up the depth chart spot for the moment.
Yeah, I mean, the guys that are under contract right now in the secondary are safety players. Will Harris, Jeremy Reeves, Quan Martin, Percy Butler, Tyler Owens. They're all under contract for next year. So I'm not sure that they'll make a move in that area. They felt very good about the signing of Will Harris last year, and they've got to feel pretty good. Once again, by the way, didn't we hear another defensive coordinator, just like we heard with Joe Witt Jr., they loved the tape of Quan Martin, right?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm pretty sure Durante Jones singled him out again, just like Joe Witt Jr. did when he got hired in his introductory press conference.
Right. Like of all the defensive players, Quan Martin may be the best example of somebody that just, for whatever reason, just could not make heads or tails of what they wanted him to do in the Joe Witt, Dan Quinn defense, and maybe Durante Jones can get more out of him. I mean, he's athletic. He can play close to the line. I think he's probably even better, frankly, closer to the line than deep safety. But, and if they have, Will Harris, then maybe he could play a little bit more like that. Maybe he can even be the nickel to a degree if they, want to go two corners and have, three safeties on the field. So, yeah, I think, to me, that's a position similar we talked about running back, Where if you tell me they just run it back, I'm not thinking that's a bad move, but I think a lot of it does hinge on what do they really think about Quan Martin. He obviously got benched towards the end of the year, and Dan Quinn that was his call.
All right, I got 30 seconds, so I've gone way over the clock with you. So I'm just going to end with this. Give me the player that you think we lose here in the first 2 or 3 days, and is there a surprise that's in the back of your mind somewhere that just will blow everybody away that it ends up happening?
Well, I think Chris Paul is probably gone, would be my guess. I think the market for him will get, I don't know, maybe north of $12 million. We'll see. And, they've got some other options with Brandon Coleman in particular. Blow you away? I don't know. I guess the Linderbaum thing, I still don't buy it completely, but the logic of improving the center spot ahead behind it with Jaden Daniels, if the whole goal of everything is to help that guy, you can't do much better than that from an offensive line perspective. So maybe that's the one, but like I said, that still seems a bit much for me at center, but that could be the one that would surprise people to a degree.
All right. Ben will be busy all day. Certainly follow him on X at Ben Standig. We're 25 minutes away from the legitimate beginning of when we're going to be getting big NFL free agency news. Keep it here. We'll be updating you all afternoon. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, theteam980.com. Don't forget, you can watch this show, and today is a busy day and a good day to watch the show on the Team 980's YouTube channel. Hit the subscribe button when you get there. That really helps us out. Hit the follow button as well. That's big for us also. And if you're listening to this podcast, later in the day, definitely rate and review it on Apple and Spotify in particular, and give it a follow. All those things really help us out. Busy day. This is really the beginning of what we used to call legal tampering. The 2.5 days, basically today, tomorrow, and then half the day on Wednesday before all of these reports about free agents moving on to other teams or re-signing with their own teams. Actually, when they re-sign with their own teams, they can sign that deal right away. But the new deals can't be signed officially until the league calendar opens up at 4 p.m. on Wednesday. And there have been instances where we've had reporting in the past on Monday and Tuesday, and a player's had second thoughts before he is signed the deal. A lot's going on right now, and let me catch you up to speed on a few of these things. We talked earlier this morning, Tua is going to be released by the Miami Dolphins. That's not a surprise. The team that Adam Schefter says is going to be in the market for Tua Tagovailoa, the Atlanta Falcons, expected to make a strong push for Tua Tagovailoa. That makes sense to me. Two left-handed quarterbacks. Penix has a much stronger arm than Tua does. But also with a Kevin Stefanski as the head coach, the systems are going to be similar with Tua in the system that he's been in with Mike McDaniel. That makes a lot of sense to me. The Cowboys, if you missed it, didn't land Max Crosby, although they were very aggressive going after Max Crosby. Most of the reporting suggests that it was the Cowboys and the Ravens, and the Ravens just blew away the Raiders with an offer that nobody else was close to. The Cowboys were talking about 1 first-round pick, but not 2. And the Baltimore Ravens gave up this year's and next year's. If I haven't said this already today, that is a lot to give up for Max Crosby. And I think Max Crosby as a known is better than the maybe. It's better than what you would pick in the draft and say, we think he can become Max Crosby. It's better to actually get Max Crosby. But 2 first-round picks, that speaks to, what it spoke to with Green Bay, going after Parsons and paying what they did to get Parsons and then giving him the contract that they gave him. That after quarterback, we still look at edge, or the NFL still looks at edge pass rusher as the next most important position on the field. As much as there's been talk from some of the advanced analytics guys over the years, corner's more important than edge pass rusher. Interior pass rushers are equally as important. By the way, interior offensive linemen have become as important as exterior, tackles. No, it's the edge rushers that have commanded the big trade compensation numbers and the massive contracts. Myles Garrett, Micah Parsons, and now, the trade of 2 first-rounders. That's not a move Baltimore typically makes. They are telling you that last year was such a disappointment. They have talent. They certainly have the quarterback, and they've got a running back. And on defense, in addition now to Max Crosby, you've got Roquan Smith, you've got Kyle Hamilton, you've got players. I'll tell you what, when you trade 2 first-rounders for Max Crosby, that, if you're a Ravens fan, that says to me, if I were, we better be in the Super Bowl in 2026. 2 first-round picks, that is a Super Bowl move, like it was with the Packers going after Parsons. They didn't get there. They were really good at various points this season. And then, of course, they lost Parsons to an injury, which was devastating down the stretch. What else is going on? Travis Kelce, expected to return to Kansas City for his 14th season. That's been reported. Let me just see. I want to give you more news rather than some of the leans for some of these guys, unless they're really strong leans. So we've talked about Tyquan Thornton, the wide receiver from the Chiefs. He definitely gave them some speed last year and had the best year for him. Mike Garafolo, NFL Network, reporting that he's not looking for the biggest deal. He wants, to find the right spot. And it could be back in Kansas City, although you wonder if that's the right spot. Why hasn't it happened yet? Talked about the Cowboys trade for Rashawn Gary, a fourth rounder. By the way, to me, that doesn't say that the Cowboys are done. Rashawn Gary, remember now, rejoins Quinnen Williams. I'm sorry, my fault. Kenny Clark. Quinnen Williams came from the Jets. Rejoins Kenny Clark, who was part of that trade for Micah Parsons. But it doesn't say to me that the Cowboys are done. Could they still be in the Trey Hendrickson market? Possibly. Here are multiple reports now on Isaiah Likely being a major target for the New York Giants. So I've not heard Likely in Washington together. Ben may end up being right that tight end isn't the spot Washington ends up adding a player to. I think we all thought that would have been the spot. I don't know how they would have treated Kyle Pitts had he been available. What else is going on here? Those are the big stories so far today. In terms of like legitimate, reporters, top tier NFL reporters, I think I've mentioned this, but I've seen Dobbs connected to Washington. I've seen Rico Dowdle connected to Washington. Seen Nick Cross, the safety, the ex-Terp, connected to Washington. Last week, there was a lot of Eric Wilson connected to Washington. He re-signs in Minnesota. Grenard, Alec Pierce. Yeah. So 10 minutes away from certainly a busy time coming up. By the way, there's a story, and this is something just to keep in mind because it's the last thing you want when we get to September. Remember, we had this a few years ago when the referees went on strike, and it was not a pretty situation. But Adam Schefter just reported in the last hour that the NFL negotiations with the NFL Referees Association on a new collective bargaining agreement are not in a good place. The league held committee meetings last week in Palm Beach, Florida, where owners were updated on the status of the talks. But one source told Schefter that the frustration among owners in terms of what the referees want is mounting. Let me just see when that year was when we were all going nuts. Remember when the referees were on strike? What year was that? Let's see if Schefter has it in his story. Here it is. The league's current CBA ends with the NFL union at the end of May. The last officiating lockout was in 2012. Wow, was that long ago? Robert Griffin III's rookie year. I would have thought that it would have been more recently. It seemed more recently. It lasted 110 days, ending after 3 weeks of controversial calls by replacement officials. I do remember there being just a, what are we doing here with the replacement officials? And that collective bargaining agreement's been in place for 13 full seasons since. Seemed more recent than that. 2012, Washington got off to a pretty decent start, actually, after the win in New Orleans to kick off the 2012 season. They lost back-to-back games to the Rams in Cincinnati. I think Cincinnati was the home opener that year. They were running triple option in that game. Nearly got RG3 killed in his third regular season game. But yeah, here we are. We know the players that they've re-signed. It's not as many as I would have thought. I really would have thought that at this point, a Mariota, if he really wanted to be here, could have been retained. Jeremy McNichols, I think they have tried with Jacob Martin. I think they perhaps have tried with Jonathan Jones. Rodriguez, it's their decision to tender, Rodriguez. I'm telling you, I think running back happens, and I think running back happens quickly. We'll see if receiver happens quickly. I would love it to be Algier. I like Algier more than Dowdle, but I like Dowdle a lot too. I've liked Dowdle since that year where he kind of broke out with Dallas, and I remember saying, that guy's pretty good. Like, they were looking for the running back, and I'm like, he may be their guy. And then he got the deal in Carolina, and they had just signed Chuba Hubbard. Hubbard got hurt, and Dowdle, had back-to-back games of over 200, and then the next week against his former team, the Cowboys, went for 180-something. Dowdle would be an excellent fit in what they're going to be trying to do. There's no doubt I would consider Dowdle to be an upgrade to what they have, even though Bill and Rodriguez both, to me, are intriguing in maybe, a David Blau scheme. My guess is on receiver, Dobbs a possibility, but I think Jennings is a possibility as well, and I think we're going to be talking about two of these guys for sure. Ben mentioned, center. That would be, if they sign Tyler Linderbaum, if we are sitting here in 15 minutes talking about Tyler Linderbaum being the center, I'm not going to hate it if he gets signed and all of a sudden he's the highest paid center. And then we would have known the plan all along on the release of Biotish, because Tyler Linderbaum is a better center. He's one of the best centers, and he's young enough to grow with Jaden Daniels. It's a very important position. But I would have certainly said a week ago or a week and a half ago, didn't see that one coming. Look at a guy like Nick Cross, but they've got safeties. Corner-wise, a right certainly edge. We've talked about, the possibilities there. What if it ended up being, can you imagine, like, if we're sitting here in 10 minutes, Hendrickson, Pierce, Linderbaum? I don't think that's what's coming, but hold on to your hats. We'll start it when we come back. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, theteam980.com. You can watch us on our YouTube channel. Big day for the team. Big couple of days, really. The next few days are big for this football team. And as I've mentioned, they have 51 players under contract, the second fewest in the NFL behind the Baltimore Ravens. They don't have a choice but to be super busy, given the fact that they only have 6 draft choices and only 2 in the top 100. So whether it's a lot of one-year deals like we saw, year one with, all of the one-year deal guys, the Zacchaeuses and the Fowlers and the Mariotas and the McNichols and the, who else was 1 year that year? Or if it's a lot more than that. We'll see. But that process gets started right now. By the way, here's a report from Ian Rappaport. Get ready for this one. The 49ers are now said to be open to trading Trent Williams if the situation contractually with Trent Williams doesn't get resolved. We're certainly not going to be the team in that market. A Tunsil extension certainly has to be coming soon as well. All right. Keep it right here. We get started in 4 minutes. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, theteam980.com. Again, watch us on our YouTube channel. And when you get there, please hit the subscribe button and hit the like button. That's big for us. Here we go. Free agency's legal tampering period, and I expect it to be very busy. I mean, ESPN and all the networks are going live, and we're right here to keep you up to date on everything Washington. This would be one of those days to keep it here because, there will be a lot of news more likely than not, and not everybody at the national level is going to get our local news first. We'll see. 12 noon. Just after it, and the window has opened for free agent deals to be struck. They can't be signed until Wednesday at 4 p.m., as I've mentioned, but this is the beginning of it. And as I mentioned when we were right before the break, Alec Pierce is off the board too.
Indy re-signing in Indianapolis for a 4-year, $116 million deal per Pat McAfee.
All right. So that puts him at 31 plus, right around 32 to be 31 plus, just less than 32 per year for Alec Pierce, the number one wide receiver on the board. So not to Washington. I know that there was, and that was the thing, guys, over the weekend. And I saw some of it myself, didn't retweet any of it unless it was really something legitimate. It's lying season, and there are a lot of people out there that this is one of those days you keep it here if you're into your local team, and if not, you probably look to just the very, very top tier of guys. Alec Pierce, it was said, by the way, when you talk about Alec Pierce, you're talking about a guy that from over the weekend and last week wanted to be where Daniel Jones wanted to be. The Colts are a talented football team. Let's not forget they were a 7-0 football team with Daniel Jones. So Pierce's deal, by the way, here's from Ian Rappaport, 4 years, $114 million, that will make him the highest paid free agent receiver in history. That's interesting to me that it's the high. So that's the biggest deal a free agent receiver has ever got. So let's see where that will rank him. Let me pull up Spot Track here because, when you're talking, so 4 years, 116, so 30 is one. Yeah, it's like 31 plus. So that's going to put him in, that 5 to 6 range, basically. So Jamar Chase signed that deal as a contract extension, never made it to free agency. Justin Jefferson never made it to free agency. CeeDee Lamb never made it to free agency. DK Metcalf, remember, was traded and given that new contract. And Garrett Wilson's, those are the top fives, the top 5 wide receiver contracts was extended as well. So there you go. The first big name, it's a receiver. He's off the board, and it's Alec Pierce, the receiver from Indianapolis, returning to Indianapolis on a 4-year, $116 million deal. I guess I find that a little bit interesting. The agent takes it all the way up to free agency beginning, this tampering period beginning, when he could have done this deal with his own team even a few hours ago before free agency started. But at that point, it would have been a contract extension, not a free agent deal. So maybe they wanted that designation, or the agents wanted the designation of the largest wide receiver free agent deal in NFL history. So that's the first one to go. We'll keep it, obviously, looking at this as things happening. But,
got one more just coming across the wire right now. Olamide Zaccheaus is signing with the Falcons. He is returning to Atlanta. Unspecified on the terms, but that's per Tom Pelissero.
Yeah, I wouldn't call that a, but so the first two
really
big announcements we have are wide receivers. So yeah, I don't know I don't know if that's an indication of really anything. But Olamide Zaccheaus, yes, signing with the Falcons. I mean, good player for us, good player in Chicago last year. I'm still surprised Zaccheaus wasn't re-signed by our team. I know they liked him a lot. And he made it to free agency, and he got more money. De'Ami Brown got, a deal that Washington certainly wasn't willing to give him. So there you go. All right. We'll keep you posted on everything that's happening. Going to be a busy, busy day for sure. Yeah, let's just see if there's anything else. Something else just popped up. Yeah. Here's Rob Domofsky, the Packers beat reporter for ESPN.com. He's the John Keim equivalent in Green Bay. He did report Romeo Doubs is going to sign elsewhere in free agency and not re-sign with Green Bay. And I think Washington could certainly be a possibility for Romeo Doubs, one of the best route runners in this free agency wide receiver class. Certainly has deep catching ability, good size, good route running, good third down receiver, etc. And if you missed this, I think I mentioned it right before the break, but Trent Williams, the 49ers say, are open now to trading Trent Williams. He's due $32 million in salary with a $38 million plus cap number. And I wonder if, the Tunsil extension is in some part held up until they see what Trent Williams gets. Also, there is a report that Daniel Jones is going to reach an actual contract extension with Indianapolis. He got tagged, remember, because they were not close to a deal last week, but apparently the deal is getting closer, and that may be why Alec Pierce is heading back to Indy. Indianapolis was certainly a place where the expectation was Pierce wanted to be if Jones was back. That's a good roster. It's a very good NFL roster. I think it's a very good coach. They got injured, obviously, late in the year. They faltered once they lost, believe it or not, Daniel Jones. I think it's kind of just, a sign of the times and a sign of what we don't know. And I've talked about this before, that here we are, at the beginning of free agency, and Malik Willis is one of the biggest names on the board. I did hear Adam Schefter say this morning that Malik Willis likely to sign with somebody today, likely to commit to somebody today. That'll be a big one to fall. And that Tua officially cannot sign or commit to anybody until he's been released, because if not, it would be last year's cap number versus the upcoming cap number. And the same goes for Kyler Murray. So don't expect Kyler Murray or Tua Tagovailoa to, for deals for those two quarterbacks to be announced today. I think for our own players, I'm actually really looking to see Bobby Wagner, Chris Paul, Marcus Mariota, Deebo Samuel here in the early hours and the early days of free agency. And it may take a while on Deebo and Bobby Wagner, but the quarterback thing is going to be interesting to see if there is an actual, market for Marcus Mariota. Kansas City makes so much sense to me because it's very possible that Patrick Mahomes is not ready to start that season. We'll see. All right. Here we go. And a little bit slow going here to start with the buildup, but we'll start getting things coming in throughout the day. Keep it here for sure. I was thinking just about all of the defensive players that they need to add to their roster. And I think one of the things that we don't give enough thought to are their existing players who are under contract. And with especially when there are new coordinators, they re-signed Shai Tuttle. They re-signed Drake Jackson. Why did they do that? Drake Jackson in particular, who was a second-round pick of the 49ers several years ago. It's because they obviously see something in him as a healthy player, as a player who, if he's healthy, can give them something. What does Durante Jones think of Johnny Newton? Where does he have Deron Payne and Javon Kinlaw playing? Did they re-sign Dietrich Wise for the purposes of just having some needed depth if they didn't get their guys in free agency? Or do they think that Dietrich Wise, who does say he will be ready when camp opens and ready to play in 2026, do they think that he is a legit, top level edge run stopper? Dorrance Armstrong played at a high level last year. I mean, I think you could say that he was the only one that played at a high level. Bobby Wagner had a decent year, certainly as a tackler, etc. But Armstrong was really their best defensive player until he got hurt. Kinlaw played well. A guy like Jeremy Reeves played well. Jacob Martin played well. But we don't know what they think of Jeremy Reeves and Quan Martin and Tyler Owens. It's more guys like Jordan McGee and Kane Medrano and Tyler Owens. Does a guy like Durante Jones say, no, these guys can play? And in my system, they're going to be significant contributors. So we don't need as much at those positions in free agency or via trade or even in the draft. I think sometimes that's the stuff that we just don't know because of the scheme fit and the coach that comes in and what he thinks of those players. Tyler Owens was, the number one athlete when surveyed by Ben Standig of all the players on the team. Quan Martin was mentioned specifically by the new defensive coordinator. They loved Will Harris last year. They thought they missed a lot when Will Harris was out. And Trey Amos is coming off, an injury where he missed the last several games of the year. Corner, though, you got to add. You've only got 2 corners under contract. So it's not like you can say, well, we got this guy. I mean, even a guy like, the guy Vigors, the guy that played a lot in preseason. I mean, he's under contract, but didn't he? I think he got hurt at the end of the year. So really, you have 2 corners under contract legitimately, among your 51, and they're Amos and Sanders still. And Ben makes a great point. Where's Sanders still going to play? What position do we think he's going to play? Is he an outside corner? Does Durante think he's the inside corner that they thought they were drafting in the second round of 2024? A lot of interesting things will happen, and we're going to see a whole new roster next year. I mean, they could still sign a lot of their own, but they didn't sign as many of their own as I thought they might sign. So we're going to see, look, once you get past the draft, there are a lot of undrafted free agents that fill out those last, 10, 11, 12, 13 spots, for training camp purposes, not necessarily to make the team, more likely than not. But you've got 30 players. You've got 25, certainly. You got 25 players that have to be retained or signed from other teams, along with your draft picks between now and the time that they get all 90 together for the first time. All right, we'll take a break, come back, keep you posted on what's happening. The negotiating window, the legal tampering / negotiating window has opened. The first big piece of news, Alec Pierce, the number 1 wide receiver on the market, is staying in Indianapolis on a 4-year, $116 million deal. There's big news on a big free agent. Let me just tell you real quickly, if you need new windows, Window Nation's offering 50% off everything right now. 50% off all windows and all window styles. Just reach out to them at 866-90-NATION or head to windownation.com and schedule your free in-home estimate. In an hour or less, they'll leave you with a quote, which will include a 50% discount because you're a listener to this show. Window Nation's got 45,000 five-star reviews, and they were ranked number 1 by Forbes magazine among all window installation companies throughout the country. So if you've been thinking about new windows, all I ask is just give them a shot to come out and give you an estimate. 866-90-NATION, windownation.com. The biggest name on the running back market was Kenneth Walker III, the Super Bowl MVP. According to Ian Rappaport, he is heading to the Kansas City Chiefs. Don't know the details of the deal at this point, but running back, wide receiver are the two big movers here early. Alec Pierce staying with the Colts. According to Diana Rossini, he had bigger offers from multiple teams. None of those teams named Washington. Kenneth Walker, the Super Bowl MVP, off to Kansas City. Interesting teaming him up, certainly, with Patrick Mahomes. They've kept Travis Kelce. We'll see whether or not they keep Tyquan Thornton. They have other offensive bodies, certainly, to add. Nothing yet for Washington, as we are now 25 minutes into the legal negotiating period, and we'll continue to see big names posted all day long. But the biggest running back, and I know that, various people were tying Kenneth Walker to Washington, Alec Pierce to Washington. Neither one of them is coming to Washington. So on the wide receiver market, as we've discussed, that would put Juwan Jennings and I think Romeo Doubs at the top of the list for Washington as possibilities. And on the running back front, I would certainly think Rico Dowdle, Tyler Algier. It'll be a running back in that category. That would be my best guess. This was from earlier today. It was a story written by Jeremy Fowler, just updating everybody on everything. And he talked about, Washington's aggression in free agency. And he wrote, the Commanders were listed frequently in our running back and receiver breakdowns above. The pulse inside the league is that this year could be Washington's most active offseason of the Adam Peters era that began in 2024. The Commanders have an interest in other positions such as corner, edge rusher, and possibly tight end. Washington has a roster with holes and nearly $90 million in cap space, and star quarterback Jaden Daniels on a rookie deal. So while the Commanders might not spend big on every position, they will be a presence. Of course, we know that they have to be a presence because they have big time needs to fill. Part of Fowler's group was to talk about Kenneth Walker, and he mentioned actually the Giants and Washington among Walker's opportunities, the Titans being a possibility too. And he liked ETN more so to Kansas City, although he said the Chiefs are checking in on Kenneth Walker as well. With respect to the wide receiver market, Romeo Doubs, Fowler reported he'll have several suitors. New England, Washington, and Tennessee are closely watching his market along with the 49ers. Whereas with Rashid Shaheed, certainly a game breaker as a wide receiver, major league disrupting threat at wide receiver and as a kick returner. Apparently a lot of interest, not only from Seattle to retain him, but from Seattle's last year offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak, who is now in Vegas as their head coach. For Mike Evans, Jeremy Fowler wrote early this morning or late last night, the Bucs remain aggressive in attempting to re-sign Mike Evans. Buffalo would have been ideal for Evans had they not traded for DJ Moore. The Commanders could emerge as a sleeper for Evans. Remember, he wants a quarterback and targets. Tampa remains in a good spot, though. But Evans not a lock to sign with them. And then on Wan'Dale Robinson, he wrote, Tennessee's been linked to Wan'Dale Robinson. There's mutual interest, but Robinson has other suitors. So there you go. That from Jeremy Fowler. Just nuggets from him on free agency before we got started, about 28 minutes to go. Apparently with Kenneth Walker, the Giants made a big push for Kenneth Walker, according to the Giants insider Jordan Renan, the John Keim equivalent. And Kenneth Walker right now and Alec Pierce, the number one running back and the number one wide receiver, are off the market here at the beginning of free agency. Pierce staying in Indy, and Kenneth Walker headed to the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs are also keeping, as mentioned, Travis Kelce. And so the Chiefs right now, when you look at whenever Mahomes gets back, it might be the beginning of the season, could be. But remember, they have Xavier Worthy, Rashee Rice under contract. That's it at wide receiver. They could lose Hollywood Brown. They could lose Tyquan Thornton. They could lose Juju Smith-Schuster. But now they've added Kenneth Walker to a backfield. Remember, Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt were both free agents. He's a great back. What a Super Bowl he had. He's been a great back since he came out. And really, it's been surprising to me that he hasn't been featured more in Seattle. And that leaves Seattle, with Zach Charbonnet, coming off the injury at the end of the year that kept him out of the late run. But that's all they have now. They've got the guy Helani who backed up Kenneth Walker in the Super Bowl, but it's Zach Charbonnet for the defending champs, along with, we'll see if Seattle makes a move for a running back now that they've lost Kenneth Walker. And remember, receiver, they have Jackson Smith-Njigba, obviously, and Cooper Kupp, but they could lose Rashid Shaheed, who was a significant player for them. That's for sure. I think one of the interesting things to watch now that we've seen some big trades, obviously, in this run-up to free agency. Last week alone, the DJ Moore deal, but the Max Crosby deal being the biggest. A.J. Brown's the one to watch. Philly apparently will deal him, but they want a first and second minimum for him. The reporting's been that New England is in the mix. If New England's in the mix for that takes him out of the Dobbs and Jennings, and they've been linked to both as well. But the Eagles, the Cowboys apparently were right there with the Ravens on Crosby, but the Eagles had expressed interest in part because of the possibility of losing Phillips after they, acquired him at the trade deadline last year. And Phillips was a big deal for them down the stretch. Now they lost, at home to the 49ers in the playoffs. But will the Eagles trade A.J. Brown? Who knows? They extended Jordan Davis over the weekend. Big deal. And now the next big question for them will be Jalen Carter, because he's now eligible for a new deal. And Carter's been a little bit more of a will he or won't he be available, where Jordan Davis really played well when Jalen Carter was out. But will the Eagles trade A.J. Brown? And would they get a first and a second for him? I don't see Washington being in that market. I don't. That does not seem like a them move. I think if you're going to pick up a receiver that way, you still have Ayuk out there, which is a possibility, and that would be, I think, very much a 1-year highly incentivized deal. And Diggs is still out there if you strike out. I said before the show I expect Washington to be busy for sure, and I think a lot of the early stuff would come on offense, and Rico Dowdle's the one that I've heard more than anything else, and that's been the one, even though my preference would be Algier. But it wouldn't shock me if a guy like John Franklin Myers, who is a really good player, and you've got to think in terms of wide receiver, what are they not going to have after next year? Maybe Terry McLaurin. What are they not going to have next year? Deron Payne in 2027. So I don't think interior D-line is off the table at all. And Franklin Myers can flat out play. And he's another guy Maybe not in the early prime of his prime years, but at 28, 29 years old, coming off, the best season of his career from a sack perspective in Denver. It's a good team. Let's understand that, with Nick Bonito and some of the others they have on defense, you benefit from that. But yeah. Anything else here? Well, while I've been rambling, I'm just searching through. Not really.
Got some more details on the Kenny Walker deal. 3 years, 43.05 could be worth up to $45 million. 28.7 guaranteed. So they're spending top of the market money in Kansas City for that running back.
Running back, top of the market. It's Barkley, right? Didn't he get 20 million?
I believe so.
Nobody else is close. Barkley, yeah. So 20.6 million in Philly per year. Christian McCaffrey at 19, Derrick Henry at 15. And then it really kind of falls off with that big deal that Jonathan Taylor did at 13.5. What did you say the money on Walker is?
It is about 15 a year. 3 years for 43.05 million could be worth up to 45 million per Jordan Schultz.
So close to 15 million a year. That puts him right there in the top three with Henry, McCaffrey, and Barkley. None of the other running backs are getting anywhere near that. And look, if Washington doesn't get, let's just say, a running back here early, it's probably because this deal is super expensive. And maybe the ones that follow people, we've seen a resurgence of two things in the NFL the last 2 seasons, and maybe more than that with respect to running back. But defense, winning more often than not, and leading the winning, and then the sort of resuscitation of the running back position, for sure. And this league is nothing if it's not a league of follow the trend for at least a little while, until it doesn't work anymore and ceases to become a trend. All right.
Per Jeremy Fowler, this is about Alec Pierce. The Commanders made an aggressive push for Alec Pierce before he ultimately decided to stay with the Colts. Per sources, New England was also in on the wide receiver. So that's per Jeremy Fowler. I don't really have any more details, but an interesting nugget on the first day of free agency.
So if Pierce was their number one, are they as excited about Dobbs as
Rashid
excited
Shaheed,
about Jennings?
You are a Washington Commander.
What'd you say?
Rashid Shaheed, come on down. I think that's probably where they would end up pivoting their sights to.
Yeah, that's interesting.
If you want the speed element,
If you want the speed, but Dobbs has the speed too.
It's true.
He doesn't have Rashid Shaheed.
He runs routes like nobody's business, man.
Yeah.
Romeo Dobbs is really good.
So Fowler reporting that Washington was deep into Alec Pierce, huh? Is that who you said reported it? Yeah. Yeah, made an aggressive push for Alec Pierce. Here it is. Ultimately decided to stay with the Colts. New England also was in on Alec Pierce. Cade Otton, tight end, returning to Tampa.
Big for Baker.
Yeah, which was, I think they got it. If you're Tampa after the season you had and losing out on that final game of the year between Atlanta and New Orleans, you got to keep some of those guys. Cade Otton is a really good receiver for Baker Mayfield. I like Cade Otton a lot. I have no idea whether or not our team would have been interested in him, but he returns to Tampa. All right, let's come back. You guys want to jump on? We'll open up phone lines at 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. What do you want to see him do? We're here in the first 35 minutes of free agency. We've got a couple of big names off the board, Alec Pierce and Kenneth Walker. Pierce stays in Indy. Walker goes to Kansas City. Washington reportedly was in on Alec Pierce. Your calls next. We'll keep you posted on everything that's going on. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, theteam980.com. And don't forget, you can watch us right now on our Team 980 YouTube channel. Please hit the subscribe button. Really big for us if you guys can just simply hit the subscribe button and the like button. Takes all of about 3 seconds to do that.
All right, happy day one of the NFL free agency tampering window. The Commanders expected to be in on several top free agent targets, including running back Rico Dowdle, defensive ends Jalen Phillips, Boye Mafe, and Adafe Owe, center Tyler Linderbaum, and wide receivers Romeo Dobbs and Mike Evans. 2 words used to describe Washington's approach this offseason: younger and faster. We'll have you covered right here on the Team 980 as the first steps of free agency get underway. Speaking of which, we start off with Kenneth Walker. He has signed a deal with the Kansas City Chiefs worth up to $15 million a year. Alec Pierce remains an Indianapolis Colt with a 4-year, $160 million deal to remain in Indy. The Dolphins, they released Tua Tagovailoa this morning to take on $99.6 million in dead cap and have also traded Minka Fitzpatrick to the Jets in exchange for a 7th-round pick. Plus, the Cowboys, they traded for Rashawn Gary this morning from the Green Bay Packers, sending them a 4th-rounder in 2027. And the Kansas City Chiefs have re-signed Travis Kelce to a 1-year, $15 million deal. Tonight, the Caps, they are set to take on the Calgary Flames from Capital One Arena. Logan Thompson set to start and likely to see the debuts of new additions Timothy Liljegren and David Camp. That'll be at 6:45 over on 106.7 The Fan. And right here on the Team 980, we got the Southern Conference Championship between Furman and East Tennessee State University. That'll be right here again on the Team 980 at 6:45. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, and hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live every day from 10 to 1. You can catch programs like Take Command all off season. Don't forget to hit the like button whenever you do decide to join us and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that is what's trending.
All right, we do have some breaking news related to Washington. According to Adam Schefter, Washington has reached an agreement on a 2-year, $60.2 million contract extension with Laramie Tunsil. We knew this was coming. There are $61.5 million in guarantees in this extension. Remember, the extension would be on top of the year that he's already under contract. So now there are 3 years left of Laramie Tunsil under contract. 2026, his cap number was to be $24.9 million. So now you get 2 years on top of that. Schefter writing there are $61.5 million in guarantees, including the biggest signing bonus for an offensive lineman ever at $32.5 million. Tunsil was the NFL's first $20 million per year offensive lineman. He was the league's first $25 million per year offensive lineman. And now he becomes the first $30 million offensive lineman with this contract extension, just over $30 million a year. Remember the Slater deal, which was the biggest deal ever done before the season last year. And then Rashawn Slater was lost to the Chargers with a devastating injury. His deal that he signed, a younger player, was 4 years, $114 million, with $92 million guaranteed, but basically penciled out to be around $28.5 per year. So the extension years for Tunsil will be the largest average annual in the history of the league for a left tackle. Let's keep in mind that is in combination with his current deal, which is more at the $25 million per year. So if you blend it together, the two at 30, the one at 25, you're talking about $85 million essentially over the next 3 years. So it's not quite $30 million per year, 29 and change. Still would make him the largest, but the extension part is $30 million plus. So Washington has nailed down Laramie Tunsil. You knew this would have to happen in this offseason once they traded for him, considering what they gave up, which included this year's second and fourth round selections, along with last year's picks. So Tunsil is in the fold for another 3 years minimum here in Washington, and that would mean his ages 32, 33, and 34 years of age seasons. And that would make him in 28, based on the details of this deal, the next opportunity. In 2029, next opportunity for him to be a free agent at the age of 35 years old. When you have a left tackle in this league who is an elite level protector, you pay that player. There are very few of them at that level. Very few of them at that level. I mean, you're talking about, not a long list of guys that can do it at that level. He's been one of them, along with, Trent Williams and Andrew Thomas and Jordan Mailata and Slater, certainly in Wirfs, guys like that. Darisaw, you pay him when you have him. We knew that was coming, so we can cross that one off the list, and we won't have a summer of contract extension talk, which is good for all of us. Any other news here?
Yeah, Michael Pittman actually just got traded from the Indianapolis Colts to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So still waiting to hear on the return, but that is the biggest move since Laramie Tunsil has been re-signed. Oh, also, Jalen Phillips is going to Carolina on a 4-year, $120 million deal with $80 million guaranteed. So Jalen Phillips off the board.
Wow, Jalen Phillips off the board. So let's recap here. Alec Pierce, the first to go, and he didn't go. He stayed.
Yes.
4 years, $116 million to stay in Indianapolis. Kenneth Walker then gets $15 million a year in essence to leave Seattle. The running back, Kenneth Walker III, the Super Bowl MVP, re-signs in Kansas City. And now Jalen Phillips gets, what does he get to go to Carolina?
4 years, 80 guaranteed, $120 million total on the contract.
Wow. $30 million a year in aggregate, an average annual, certainly for the Carolina Panthers, who, let's not forget, made the postseason last year and were very close to upsetting the Rams on Wild Card Weekend. All right, those are the big stories of the day. Pittman traded for swapping late round picks. Pittsburgh adds, another receiver. I like Michael Pittman, not as much as Pierce. And the Phillips news, that means, essentially Hendrickson's still out there. Phillips was sort of in that next tier. So for Washington, no Alec Pierce, but it was reported by Jeremy Fowler that Washington was very interested and was in the mix for Alec Pierce. So that means Dobbs, that means Jennings, those are the guys, Shaheed, those are the guys out there. And then the running back, no Kenneth Walker. There were a lot of reports over the weekend. Washington connected to Kenneth Walker, and they did not sign him either. What did you say?
First quarterback just came off the board. Malik Willis has reached an agreement with the Miami Dolphins. So everybody predicting Malik to Miami, it's finally becoming official.
So here's why that's interesting to me. Because, there's a very small sample size, obviously, with Malik Willis. And Malik Willis was rumored to potentially be a guy that could go to a LaFleur in Arizona. Instead, he goes to a Hafley in Miami. Hafley's a defensive head coach who was the defensive coordinator in Green Bay. Two coaches that really knew the player. But LaFleur's system, obviously, I think there was a lot of thought that he could end up in Arizona. This is going to be one of those that'll be fascinating to watch because, man, it happens every year. Before a season starts, projecting who the big free agents the following season or the following offseason will be, nobody had Malik Willis as one of the top free agents. So Tua is gone. Tua apparently being chased down by the Atlanta Falcons, but his release doesn't become official until Wednesday at 4 p.m., so you won't get any sort of an announcement. It makes sense, Atlanta does. Stefanski, left-handed quarterback, to go with Penix Jr. as a backup. I'm sure Atlanta people will think he will compete. I think Penix will win that job if he's healthy. And then Malik Willis ends up in Miami. The Arizona opening will be a very interesting opening to keep an eye on. That's for sure. This was predicted by Schefter this morning, not necessarily Miami, but that Malik Willis would be the first quarterback off the board, and it would be day one. Can't wait to see the terms of that deal. I mean, what does a Malik Willis get for his small sample size at that position? Does he get a Sam Darnold year?
Giants
contract?
Isaiah Likely off the board to the Giants. That one hurts.
We saw some of that reported earlier that the Giants were big into Isaiah Likely. I did not think Likely was likely here. I think that was just something that just never really was something that they were interested in. Ben may be right. They may not be looking at any tight ends. So, look, the only move at this point for our team is the extension with Laramie Tunsil, which puts him in that category of the largest average annual and the largest guaranteed signing bonus. All right. Who wants to weigh in here? Mike in Pennsylvania. Go ahead.
Hey, Kevin. How are you?
Good. What's up?
So I'm pretty, I don't want to say excited, but I'm just glad that we didn't spend that type of money on Phillips. I'm actually okay with not spending that kind of money on Pierce, but I think that early on, this is not no rocket science, but early on, who they sign is going to determine who we draft. But I'm hoping that tight end situation, I don't think anybody really talks too much about it, but Kenyon Sadiq, I think that he produces a level of play that can open up the field just like.
You think they're going to take Kenyon Sadiq? It's at number 7.
I don't think at number 7, but if they trade it back, I would take him in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I mean, what a combine he had. What an athletic specimen he is. He does not have the greatest hands. Just going to mention that. It's pretty important to have great hands at that position, but he's a freak. There's no doubt about that. But the trade back market will be, I just don't see it being a robust market to get real value to trade back in a draft that virtually everybody says has somewhere between 8 and 12 players max that are actually deserved to be first round picks based on the grading. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Let's go to Kevin in Arlington. Kevin, go ahead.
Hey, Kev, thank you for taking my call. I'm very excited about the Tunsil extension. That's tremendous news. What I'd like to see by the end of today is that they complete the picture with the O-line. Would I love the kid from Baltimore? Of course. It might be too rich. I do not want going into next season with Allegretti as a starter. We have to remember Allegretti got benched after 2 games last year at left guard. I mean, he's a backup, and he's just okay. And then the other thing is, I don't want to spend all that money on Hendrickson. I don't believe they will. But I want to go to bed tonight knowing we've got our starting center and we've got a starting edge player. And if they accomplish those 2 things today, I'll be happy. Maybe they'll do more than that.
Yeah. I hear you. By the way, the money for Malik Willis looks to be 3 years, $67.5 million. I don't know how much of that is guaranteed. I'm going to guess at least 40 of it's guaranteed, but that would put him just over $22 million per year. So he did not get a Sam Darnold. What is it?
Being told 45.
45 guaranteed.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense on a 67.5 gross deal. So nowhere near necessarily the Darnold deal. That would have been unbelievable, but still Malik Willis getting paid after some of the games we saw when he was in Tennessee. Pretty remarkable. Thanks, Kev. Mark and Largo, finish it up for us.
You know what? Look, I have to say this, and I have to say this on your show. Adam Peters, I owe you an apology. I was overzealous in what I was saying. I owe you an apology. You got Laramie Tunsil done before the draft. I'm happy about that. I think he knows what he's doing. Kevin, you said it beforehand, and I want to owe you an apology as well for coming on your show for the last 6 months saying that Adam Peters is an idiot. Not an idiot. You learn from your mistakes. People can make mistakes their first year. You can learn from it, and you go from there. It takes a real big man to admit that he made a mistake. Now, from this day forward,
it takes a real big man, and you're that big man, as Michael Scott would say. Real quickly, what do you want to see him do before you go to bed tonight?
You got to get an edge rusher, and you got to get some receivers. Now, here's the deal. You don't have to get the top flight receivers. I actually think you can get Brandon Ayuk in the next couple of weeks. But it looks more and more likely. I think your boy may be coming over here, Juwan Jennings. He may be coming over here. But if you can get De'Ami Brown along with the guy from San Diego, the Chargers, get him and Chubb too. If you can get, because Kevin, I think you'll agree with me. I think they're going to get 2 defensive ends in free agency. That I do believe.
Remember this. It's one of the edge pass rushers certainly could come at number 7 overall. All right, I got to run. Thanks, by the way. And you are one big man to admit that you are a big man. That is for sure, Mark in Largo. All right, keep it here. Back tomorrow. Chris is next.